podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello, I'm your host, Les Bubka. Welcome to Anxious Black Belt, a podcast that focuses on karate, mental health, and everything in between. If you enjoy our content and would like to support us, best way to do that is to listen to another episode, share with your friends, and leave us a review. All this stuff helps the mysterious algorithm to introduce our podcast to new audience. Thank you for joining me, and let's listen to the episode. Okay, hello. It's a huge pleasure for me to have a Whistlekick's martial arts voice, the legendary voice of Jeremy Lesniak.
Legendary.
Um,
You're setting the
are
bar
you
too
still
high, man.
are you still pronouncing your name Lesniak or Lesnak?
I'm in America. I've always been in America. We don't hit the S quite the way that it should.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, Lesniak is how I pronounce. In fact, honestly, anybody that gets it even remotely right, I'm fine with. You can.
Well,
I'm sure you can imagine what I grew up with.
Yeah, I'm Polish, so I'm gonna say there was a S with the apostrophe above, so it's Leśniak for me, which is a proper name, but Lesnak. It's pleasure to have you. Again, I'm sorry that it took me so long to get you. I just kind of got overwhelmed with my little success, so getting people and stuff. But I'm really happy that we can chat together and pick your brains about stuff because
Yeah.
you are actually not a podcast, you're a radio.
Yeah, I enjoy podcasting. It's been a great way to connect with a whole bunch of people, and at risk of seeming amateur, it keeps throwing. Hold on.
Technology, right?
Yeah, tell me about it. All right, I think we're good.
Yeah,
All right, I'm getting conflicting notifications about which microphone is being used, but we'll see if
I can
does
hear
everything
you fine.
sound okay on your end?
Yeah. Very
Okay,
clear.
all right.
So,
I recently moved, so my setup is still kind of getting put back together. It took, I don't know about you, but I get kind of picky with things. So I nitpick and I haven't quite settled on exactly how I want things to be. So that means they're a little less permanent and subject to me bumping things.
do you've got a setup position that you got everything set and it stays there? So like a room dedicated to podcasting?
Well, I've got a bedroom that I use as an office, and what you can't see, there's a really large desk here, and I have arms, right? Like I don't know if you'll be able here. I can move this, right? So I've got these arms that I use for everything from the camera to the lighting, and right now the microphone is on a base. And I just today remounted the arm for the mic, so I might be moving that back. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately not afford to have a bedroom. Kids took over, so I'm kind of wandering from the wife's office because her job is more important than mine to my son's bedroom and just resetting everything. But I feel your pain. It's like, you connect in the same port and suddenly microphone goes, well, no, I'm not going to give you a quality. I'm going to be burping now. It's like,
Well, what it is with this microphone, it's a great microphone, and it's either the port or the cord, and I keep forgetting. Here, I'm gonna make a note. Mic cord. I'm leaving myself a note. I don't know about you. I keep Post-its next to me all the time, and I got to figure out, is it the cord or is it the place where it plugs in? But
yeah,
as long as it's coming through,
choice
okay.
of new thing. For me, it's kind of still new. I'm learning. Luckily, I've got one of my students. Turns out he's a audio engineer, so it's like million questions. How do I set up this? How do I do this? How do I make it better?
Perfect.
But hey, how did you get into the podcasting overall?
Yeah, so that's kind of a funny story in that it wasn't supposed to be me. Years ago, Whistlekick, we had our protective gear, and that was what we launched with, and we were trying to grow. And as you or anybody else out there who has tried to grow a business within the martial arts community knows, we are so fractured that it can be really difficult to reach people. and I did everything I knew how to do to reach. I was putting ads in you know the handful of magazines that still existed, and it wasn't growing. And I said, all right, what do we do? And so I sat down and I made a big list of all the things that we could do to grow. And the idea that popped to the top was we should have a podcast. Now this is 2014, so podcasting wasn't new, but it certainly wasn't as big as it is now. And I looked around at the friends that I had in the martial arts world and I said, hey, Glenn, I think you would be a great podcast host. What do you think? And he said, yeah, Jeremy, that sounds like a lot of fun. We met a couple times, we talked about it, and we were about ready to get started. We were working through our concept, and I was going to be behind the scenes. I was going to do the editing. I was going to sell ads. I was going to do all the other stuff except be in front of the camera, because historically that's not where I'm comfortable. I'm used to being, behind the scenes. And then Glenn has a heart attack and nearly dies at 45 years old. And so
Wow.
like that, all of a sudden this great idea had nobody to do it. And I went, I guess I'm going to do it myself. And so I jumped in and learned everything I had to do. And if you go back, if you listen to any of those early episodes, you can tell I didn't know what I was doing and I was not comfortable. But it's been really interesting. Here we are, we're getting close to episode 1000. And I think I'm okay now.
Yeah,
I
every
think
time I'm listening,
I've figured out some things.
yeah, every time I'm listening to you guys, it's you speak with well-mannered, controlled. You always very relaxed, which I'm kind of struggling with it. So my question was how long it took you to make the adjustment. For me, the big one is I think in Polish language we're using, because I see that with my friends from the same city as I am, we're using a lot of breaks like which doesn't sound great on a podcast. So I'm trying to eliminate that,
Most
and
people do
it
speak with
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yes.
So I used to do that. If you go back, and I don't remember where it happened, but a friend of mine in the martial arts, John, shout out to John, reached out to me and he said, Jeremy, you're getting better. You're doing a great job, but I don't think you realize how much the and the bothers us as listeners. And that was all the motivation I needed. And what I learned was it's better to have a silent pause than to say, but, etc. Right. So if I'm not sure what to say, and then I figure out what to say. A
But
lot of people have podcast players that take out the silence.
mhm,
So they might not even know that you paused. And I've also learned that speaking slower isn't a bad thing. This isn't a debate. We're not trying to get through a certain number of words to make a point. And so much of the world is high energy and stressful. I actually have audiobooks and podcasts that I'll listen to at below normal speed because they're too high energy and they stress me out. So I figure, you know what? If I speak calmly, if I speak a little slower sometimes, that's not a bad thing.
I agree. I agree. It's very nice and soothing listen to your voice, and I try to get myself to kind of improve my levels on the same thing, because I've got that panic mode that I need to speak faster and faster and faster so people understand me. Is like the breaks that you make, and I've got other friend who does even longer breaks. It's causing me being uncomfortable, and it's like we should say something now. We
Mhm.
should say something now. But I think it is. He said to me then, the right breaks between your words is that border of being uncomfortable in your head. So if you're doing a pause and it's getting uncomfortable, then you're okay to speak. Everything else before that is too fast. I don't know if that resonates with you or not.
Yeah, it does. It does. And, one of the things I've figured out, and you've been on the show, you were generous to come on as a guest. And so you may or may not have figured this out, but I've talked about this a few times. If I have a quote secret as an interviewer, because people tell me you're a great interviewer. I don't think I'm a great interviewer, but there's one thing that I do that I think I do a really good job of. I shut up.
Mm,
And see, I held that pause long enough. You filled it. I'm okay with that. I've become really comfortable letting the space just hang out because we can always edit it if we have to. I don't mind if there's some silence. And what that does is it means the guest becomes, if it's an interview show, becomes a little bit uncomfortable. And that means that they don't censor as much. And so I get a more authentic version of them. I keep them a little unbalanced, not uncomfortable, but just kind of a little unbalanced. And I don't remember exactly where I got that, but I started to notice when you look at the most confident people in the world, the people that we look at and see as, maybe they're people who are really comfortable in public as celebrities or public speakers or sometimes politicians. They don't mind silence. They're comfortable with the silence. And I think there's something for us to notice in martial arts too. And I remember, I don't know if you're at all a fan of kata. I love kata. Kata is my favorite aspect of martial arts. And within as an aside, within Whistlekick, we talk about martial arts with generic terms. We talk about it as forms, but I am first and foremost a karateka. So what I do is kata, even though when we talk about it as Whistlekick, it's forms. And I remember as I came to understand the difference between a good kata and a great kata was the space in between. And I started to hear about that with classical music. And the example that I remember, I don't remember where this happened, but I remember how I felt so vividly. Somebody was talking about classical music, and they said, if perfection was what we wanted, we would all go see robots play classical music. But that's not what we want. It's the mild differences and imperfections even in between the notes. A great classical musician plays the space between the notes, and a great martial artist plays the space between the movements, whether it's fighting, whether it's forms. And if you think about it, if I remember watching Riku Usami, who I think is the best kata practitioner I've ever seen, and watching her play the space between her movements.
Yeah,
And
she
that's when
does.
it clicked for me.
She does an amazing job of kata. I do really like to watch her
Yeah.
doing performing the katas. So why is it karate? Why karate is your chosen thing? Because people asking me sometimes why karate, and I really struggle to pinpoint what attracts me back to karate. I try many different things, but I always circle back to karate, and it's very difficult for me to pinpoint why. It's just something
Yeah.
about it that it brings me back.
Well, if I remember correctly from when you were on my show, karate is where you started, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, karate is where I started, and I train in kickboxing, and I've trained in taekwondo, and I've trained in a number of other things. And I don't know, and again, this is not my analogy. I got this from someone else, but it seems to hold really true. Karate became the language for the movements for me. I think about a punch, even if I'm doing taekwondo, I think of a punch or a kick in taekwondo in karate terms. So here's a great example. I grew up in primarily an Okinawan philosophy karate system. And then when I did taekwondo years later, I did ITF taekwondo, which has sine wave, the action
Hmm.
moving up and down. Well, that's not how we did it in my karate school. So I had to think about, okay, so start with your karate stance and your karate movement, and you adjust it in these ways, right? In the same way that, I'm working on learning Spanish. I don't think in Spanish, I think in English and very quickly try to translate to Spanish.
Hmm.
So I'm going to guess it's the same for you. And I've talked to other people who have seen it the same way, that it's karate because that's where you started. And that's how you see the world of punching, kicking, striking.
I can see that that's your basic language, as you said, and then
Yeah.
you translate everything to it. Yeah. So, what style did you start it in?
I was really lucky. I had two instructors. They were married, and he was an Ishinru
Hmm.
practitioner, and she was primarily It was a flavor of Kyokushin, but she had a lot of Goju influence as well. And so we grew up with two different sets of kata, and we did, very different sorts of drills, and we sparred sometimes in different ways. And, there was some Japanese jujitsu worked in there. And so to me, it all kind of lumped together. It was only years later when I um, met other people who trained in Ishinryu that I was able to see where the boundaries. Oh, you don't do that? Okay, so there's where the Ishinryu is. But to me, it was a mix.
Yeah, it's very interesting mix Kyokushin and Ishinryu because they both kind of um very different from the main core like Goju Ryu or Shotokan and stuff like
Yeah.
that. They're kind of on the both extremities. Um, how is the how you connect all this together? Did you make like your eclectic mix of it? So parts of Kyokushin and parts of Ishinryu and something somewhere in between?
Yeah, so growing up, we had, our curriculum wasn't super formalized. We had certain
Hmm.
katas that we had to know, for yellow belt, for example. If I remember correctly, we had to know Pinyon Shodan and Seisan.
Hmm.
And for blue belt, we had to know Seiuchin and Pinyon Nidan, right? And that kind of tracked as you moved up. There was one of each, and sometimes, you might have to learn two or three katas from one. But outside the kata part, we had a lot of individualization. Sometimes we would do, if the Ishinryu instructor was teaching, thumb on top, and
Hmm.
if his wife was teaching, thumb at the side, right? So we would adjust in real time, and I didn't, because I was young, I didn't get how cool that was at the time. And now I've got those two philosophies really threaded together. They're very strongly connected for me, and I can kind of flip between them depending on what's going on, and it allows me to step in and train pretty much anywhere with anybody, and be able to hang. It doesn't mean I'm good, but I can at least not feel like an idiot, and so that's kind
Hmm.
of fun.
That must have been very interesting conversations that in that household with a Kyokushin practitioner and Ishinryu practitioner.
Yeah, and once in a while you'd get to see them spar, and they're both absolutely phenomenal martial artists. And shout out to Beth and John for, I mean, they were a second set of parents to me. They raised me. I would not be who I am. I would not, to be really blunt, Whistlekick would not exist without, I
Hmm.
mean, just point blank, because of the martial arts philosophies that they instilled in me. But now, I still get to, I haven't in a year or so, 2 years. I still get to talk to them and hang out with them, and I've seen what's become of them, because they ended up kind of Ronin without instructors,
Hmm.
but they never stopped asking, how do we make this better? How do we improve? And they never stopped looking for where to pull information. So they were constantly teaching each other and training each other. And the things that they've done, and the things, even when I was growing up as a kid, the things that they figured out, there are things that they're doing that some people are just now figuring out, right? Like the talk in, for example, in the kata world about application, about bunkai or oyo or whatever term you want to use. We were doing that in the early 80s. I didn't know that was uncommon then.
Hmm.
And it's so cool to see how far they moved things. And I'm so lucky. This is not, I'm not saying I'm good by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm open, and I've seen things, and that allows me to connect dots in a way that I don't think everyone gets to, and I'm really lucky.
Hmm. I think that's one thing which really missing in martial arts. Everybody talks about it, but there's lack of that openness
Yeah.
for people doing stuff differently. It's very tribal and cliquey. You coming from this style, or we're doing this like different, and there is kind of everybody say about, respecting others, but when actually comes to it, not many people follow through, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it wasn't until I went off to college. So I started training when I was 4. So by the time I'd gone off to college, I'd been training for 14 years. And it was only through training in college there were a couple clubs on and near campus that I realized how lucky I was because of how open-minded they were growing up. If we had someone come in to visit, because I grew up in Maine, and people who know US geography knows a lot of people go to vacation in Maine. So in the summer, we would often have a visitor for a week or 2 weeks. Someone wanted to come and train, and they were open. They're like, yeah, great. But they also did something else that I've seen very few schools say. Hey, you've been training for more than a year or two. Teach
Mm.
us something. Teach us a form. And we would actually spend a class with this guest instructor who might have been a green belt in a completely different style, just sharing a form with us, because it didn't mean went into the curriculum. It didn't mean we had to know it, but they just wanted to learn from everyone they could.
Mm.
And that's what Whistlekick is now. And that's what our events are. It's just, if you've got something good to share and you're not a jerk, I want to learn it. Because
That's
that's
a
how
good
else am I going to get better?
that's good set of principle. We're using very similar here. I picked it up
Yeah.
from a Bunke Bastards that, main thing in our seminars is don't be a dick. If you're not
Yes.
gonna be a dick, you're probably gonna be all right. So,
Yeah. And it's funny, it's something that I think about a lot is how do we end up with so many high-ranking martial artists who are dicks?
yeah, that's
It
that.
shouldn't happen. And I've spent a lot of time, in fact, for probably the first 200-300 episodes of martial arts radio, this was a subject that came up almost every episode because I was obsessed with it.
Mm.
How does that happen? And I think I figured it out. You get someone who starts training when they're young, they develop skill, they're really good, and the instructor sees the problem, sees that they're becoming a dick, but promotes them anyway.
Mm.
And eventually they get older, their skill fades, and all they're left with is being a dick. And so they lean into that because
Yeah,
that's because they're angry that the thing that justified their dickishness is now gone.
interesting. I think it's just the power and money corrupts. You see that, I think what you were saying, I can relate with your teachers that because they've been open-minded,
Mm.
welcoming everybody, willing to learn, they become run-ins because they didn't fit the organizations. I had the same with my teacher because he didn't fit the corporate karate world. He was independent.
But there are plenty of counterexamples, right?
Mm.
I think of somebody like Dave Kovar. I don't know if you've had the chance to
No.
speak with Hanchi Kovar. Lives out in California. Wonderful, wonderful man. I think the world of him. And he was instrumental too. We ended up at an event. He was headlining the event. I was not that I'm anybody, but I was less than nobody at the time. And I watched him teach a session and then sit down on the bleachers and watch the next person give their session.
Mm.
Now, even at the time, he was incredibly well known, and he has so much positive influence over this industry, and he helps so many people in so many wonderful ways. And from the outside, at least, he appears to be successful in doing it. If uh, at least every way, but financially, but I suspect financially as well. And he's one of the kindest people I know. And I could rattle off another dozen people who are like that have large organizations that treat us well. Because here's the thing with what we do, because we are so open-minded, because we're not, Kyokushin, we're not Shorin-ryu. For people to let us in means they have to be open-minded. And I've seen the ones that don't, they seem like they're going to, and then they don't. But you get these other people who, some of them have hundreds, if not thousands of people in their organization, and they just say, come join us, come hang out,
Mm.
come learn, come share. You want to share something? Cool. Go Go teach a session over there. So, but what I think happens is the dicks are louder. And so
For
people
sure.
assume that there are far more of them. I actually think there are fewer of them. They're just louder.
I think it's maybe I misspoken with the money and power, but I think
Sure.
the money and power amplifies who you are already.
Yes, I'll completely agree with that.
So
Yeah,
like you said, if you got a loud person who is not of a good character, giving him a power just gonna make him louder and more power driven.
for
So, but
sure.
what do you think would be the remedy for that situation? Because I think that even of internet and seeing what's happening on the groups, which mostly I left now, I see lots of people who I respected it, and after reading their comments to people who asking genuine questions and how they treat those people who might
Mhm.
be white belt, green belt, they don't just maybe never been exposed to like proper karate, how they treating them, I just lost completely respect.
Yeah, I don't think you have to go too far to see the negative side of social media
Mm,
and the fact that there are people who I know personally. I love them dearly. I do not interact with them on social media because they're horrible people on social media. And I think that there's just something about the way social media is that brings that out in us. I think it takes a lot more work to remain a quality person when that's what's happening. But social media seems like it's shifting. I think a lot of us are pulling back from it. I think that's a good thing. But I also think that for all of the downsides that the internet has brought us, I think for the most part it's been overall positive for the martial arts because we used to hear very, very often, well, guess what? Your school and your instructor and the system that you're learning really is the best in the world. So many people heard that, but people don't believe that when they hear it anymore because they have access to the internet. And so, what I think is happening is generationally, we're seeing less arrogance, we're seeing more open mindedness as time goes on. We're not, it's not going to be gone, it'll never be gone, but I think we'll see less of it over the next few decades. And hopefully that continues because it's a good thing. But I think just as money and power can reveal character, I think also in at least some cases, social media is revealing character.
sure,
And so
I can do.
people that maybe we're really good at hiding the fact that they weren't kind. You can be a wonderful martial artist and not be kind. Unfortunately, I know quite a few of them. We see, oh, okay, you're kind to my face, but when you're tired and stressed and you think you're being attacked, you're not kind. Okay, well, now I've learned something about you.
Mm. Yeah, I'm falling into that one as well. Sometimes I get really tired and grumpy. Today is the perfect example. Um, my kid's been ill for a week and now they passed it to me. So when
Mm,
teaching today, really tired and you're catching yourself. I'm getting really frustrated with people, but then you stop for a second, you think, why am I getting angry with the people? They have done nothing. They are here for training. So,
right.
reset, breathe in,
Yeah,
back to
but
normal.
it's natural, right? I mean,
Mm.
you know, every pet I've ever had or spent a lot of time with had a day where they snapped at me for something, right? They don't have the stresses that we all have day to day, but if a happy dog can have a bad day, then the rest of us are going to have a bad day. And just, you work with it, you go back, you apologize, you try to learn from it and not do it again, and know that it's going to happen again in at least a different way.
Yeah. So you said that Ishinru is not a. Uh, I might be wrong. I'm not very familiar with Ishinru, but in my head it is one of the newer systems compared to like super traditional ones from Okinawa. Um, did you had a lot of kind of correction of your system, or that's not working, your thumbs up and having a straight fist pushing in, your kata look a little bit different than the, I'm putting quotes, traditional Okinawan karate, and leaning into the kind of nomenclature and naming stuff and obsession with Japanese names, because most of the karate systems using different names for the same thing, and people get really, really stressed about it. Oh, that's not what it is. In our system is different, and you're using this wrong.
Yeah, I see it when, my favorite one. Here's my absolute favorite one. People that get really mad about how you spell the word kempo.
Oh yeah,
Is it with
yeah.
an M or an N? Well, ultimately, it's Japanese, so it doesn't really matter, right? What's the purpose of language? Is to convey an idea.
Mm,
If I call it, you know, if you call it Gadan Barai and I call it downward block, and somebody else calls it low block, and um, there's another Japanese name that's swimming around the back of my head for it. Does it matter? If we more or less get the same movement out of it, does it matter? And I would say it doesn't matter. It's martial arts, not martial language. There's a
mm,
movement in there. And I do think that there can be value in learning the language and learning terms and understanding lineage. I think all of those things can, and I'm underscoring that word, can have value, but I don't think that they are a priority, and I don't think they should ever be a barrier between martial artists. I think if you hold on to language or lineage or style in a way that creates distance between you and any other martial artist, I think you're doing it wrong.
mm. I agree. Uh,
So the Ishinryu katas that I grew up with, again, it wasn't until I was in my 20s and I met other Ishinryu practitioners that I realized a lot of the philosophy that we had in the way that we did Ishinryu and the way we did katas, because the Ishinryu instructor, he wasn't a big fan of katas. He wanted to spar, right? He was
mm,
he was he was a fighter, right? Like that's why he started training. He grew up in an area where, it was a little violent. And so he learned martial arts to protect himself. And unfortunately, he was able to test himself quite a number of times. So we didn't spend a lot of time on the Ishinryu katas with him, but his wife, the other instructor, loved katas. So most of our Ishinryu katas came more with her philosophy, which was, a little softer, a little more crisp. There's the Kyokushin,
mhm,
a little more competition ready, I would say. Most of the katas that I competed with were Ishinryu katas done in a very non-Ishinryu way, deep stances and things.
mhm,
I still enjoy doing those forms in that way. I can do them now in a more philosophically correct way, shorter stances and everything. But I don't think there's anything wrong with being able to do a kata in a bunch of different ways,
mm.
authentic or not.
What if you could say, what is the key principle and the difference between Ishinryu and other karate systems? It's the reason I'm asking, because Ishinryu is not very popular. It never been popular in Poland, and I
Mm.
don't see many dojos in UK. I think the United States have got like a most of the dojos from Ishinryu.
Yeah, and my understanding of this, and if I'm wrong and somebody out there knows the truth here, please check me and email me, Jeremy@whistlekick.com. But my understanding of it is that most of the Ishinryu that made it back to the US came from Marines that were stationed overseas during the Korean War. Okay. And so you end up with these hotbeds on the East Coast, it's New Jersey. There was a lot of Ishinryu that spidered out from New Jersey because of a military base that was specific to Marines there. That's my understanding. Philosophically, in Ishinryu, it's short natural stances, vertical punches, thumb on top, and the blocks are meant to be very destructive. So there's There's a conditioning element, so downward block in Ishinru, what we were taught, my standard downward block,
Mm.
you'd come across with the wrist. Ishinru, you're trying to connect with the knuckles.
Okay.
You're trying to turn everything into a strike. So, inside block isn't here, it's here again with the knuckles.
Oh, very interesting. Um,
Yeah.
how how to say it? Um, in terms of conditioning, what would be the differences between the Kyokushin conditioning and Ishiniro conditioning, or is it in your dojo all very mixed? I suppose it was very
Yeah,
mixed.
I don't think I can speak to that. My understanding of Kyokushin, true Kyokushin, doesn't come from my Kyokushin education,
Mm-hmm.
because while we would say talk about leg kicks, we didn't train leg kicks. We did some conditioning, and
Mm-hmm.
we'd bang forearms and we'd bang shins sometimes, but not in the way that I'm used to hearing Kyokushin practitioners talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, changing the subject a little bit just came up
Sure.
to my mind. How did you come up with the name Whistlekick?
um, so in the mid 2000s, I'd started training Taekwondo, and I bought a set of protective gear, and it started falling apart in a few months. And I'm not going to call out the brand. There are only a few. Some of you can probably figure it out. Happened to be orange. Orange is one of my favorite colors. I'm wearing an orange t-shirt now for those listening. And I said, there's got to be a better way. There has to be a company making better stuff. And so I would go home from class, and I'd sit on the internet, and I'd grab a beer, and I would Google everything I could come up with, and I just wasn't finding anything better. And I said, maybe I'll make gear myself. And so I started to think about, okay, if I had my own gear, if I created a company that made its own gear, what would we do differently? And I started to come up with all these ideas, and I said, it would be really cool for the kids. What if we had Nerf whistles in the gear, so that when they punched, they would punch straight because it would make a noise, as opposed to, how do most small children learn to punch? How do they start? They kind of flop their hand, right? They
Mm-hmm.
don't punch straight. But if we could give them a sound when they punched or kicked, I bet they would get better a lot faster. Now, when I launched the company, the prototyping firm that I worked with, they said, that's a cool idea, but you can't afford the engineering on that. That's going to be a lot of money. And so
Mm.
I gave up on that idea. And if somebody out there wants to run with that idea, cool. Like, you have my blessing on it. I mean, eventually we'll do it. It's just we're not there yet. But the idea led to the name Whistlekick. And at the time, whistlekick.com, of course it's taken now, but even back in 2006, 7, it was hard to find a good name.
Mm-hmm.
So I grabbed the name, and we kept the name, and it's the only good name for anything I've ever come up with. What's our podcast name? Martial Arts Radio. It's about as generic as you get.
Mm.
You know, the events that we do around the U.S. that are training events that last all day and they're free are called Free Training Day. I mean, I'm the most boring person in the world when it comes to naming things, but somehow I got Whistlekick right.
Mm. So how it's interesting what you said because I'm just in a stage of we done our own geese because I was not
Mm.
happy
Oh,
with
cool.
what
Yeah, I
I
think I
had.
saw you posted today. Those just arrived,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
nice.
So
That's
I
awesome.
just sent them. So and lots of women said they are very comfortable, but we could make better. So I
Mm.
look around and women's geese are super expensive and we can make them nearly half price. And so it took me good few months to redesign them, get because women are all the different sizes. So what we're gonna do a little bit differently is just you're gonna order a trousers separately to a top,
Great.
so you can match it stuff. But the all development stuff and putting effort into providing a good quality equipment is very taxing both on amount of work you have to put and the stress you have to go. It's just the gears are out, but I'm already stressed. What's the feedback gonna be for the
Mhm.
prototypes? And how did you kind of took yourself from the first stages to where you are now?
It's exhausting. People don't understand how difficult it is. When I was developing our our line of gear, our line of foam gear, and I'm incredibly proud of it. It has been out for 10 years. I'm using gear that is from before we released it. My gear is 12 years old. It's still great. It shows barely any signs of wear. And there are plenty of people out there with 6, 8 year old gear. I mean, I'm what we did is great. But to get something that good took several years.
Mm.
And I had to fly to the factory. And I spent days at the factory. And we're cutting foam, and I'm, working with the floor manager, and I went all in on doing this. And people don't realize, you realize now that you've done it. People think, well, all you have to do is, no, it's never that easy, because you don't understand what the manufacturing side is, right? The reason most of these companies can make the product as inexpensively for you as they do is because they've built a process. They have a system. It makes it easy. And the moment you change that system on them, the price goes up, and sometimes it goes up a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I finding difficult as well, um, that most of the manufacturers, you ask them something, yes, of course we can do it.
Yep.
And then you get the product, it's like, that's completely not what I asked for.
We did, and fortunately, Kataro exists, the belt company here in
Mm,
the US. So I never have to make belts again. But before Kataro, we tried making belts. And it was not a small order, because I thought, what's belts are easy, right? We got some prototypes, they looked
mm,
great. So we ordered a bunch of colors and a bunch of sizes, and they came in, and it was the worst shipment. I mean, we've done not just prototypes, but actual like live product. We've probably
mm.
done 2 dozen different things over the years. And these belts came in, and some of them, they took two small belts and sewed them together. You had some that, because they were labeled with sizes, but a lot of them were the wrong size. So I had to measure every single belt, and I threw out a ton of them. The factory didn't care. And, there are plenty of people out there that haptic belts I think we're ever going to make. So those are at least collector's items, if not,
Mm.
yeah, I guess that's all they are. But it made me sad, right? Here I put all this time in, we put this money in, we got enough good ones out of it that we came close to breaking even, but we didn't make money, and I don't get that time back. What else could I have done with those dozens of hours from start to finish? Quite a bit.
Mm.
And there are a lot of that's the worst one, but there are plenty of others that are like other stories like that.
Mm. So what would you be your advice for people like myself who just dipping their toes into a product manufacturing and development and stuff? Because I've got lots of ideas, and it's like a beginner's luck and the hopefulness that, yeah, it's gonna be so nice and stuff. So what to avoid with the pitfalls?
It's about finding the right factory, the right partner. So the factory that makes our gear, it's not a secret, they're in Mexico, and if you dig around, you'll be able to find out who they are. I'm not going to share that, but
Mm,
um, they're a wonderful partner. In the 10 years we've been working with them, we had one bad shipment, and I know what happened, and we were able to correct it. But they're great. Now, sometime, even though they're great, and I'm confident in saying they are great because I've worked with so many factories. They're great, but it can still take anywhere from 2 to 6 months for a shipment to come in.
mhm.
Um, Sometimes they don't email me back. They've tried to send the shipments to the wrong place before. Right, there a lot of things have gone wrong, but and that's a great factory. If you end up with a bad factory, you get belts that are sewn together from two small ones. So I would say, if I wanted to make, like, like what you're talking about with geese, I would be talking to 6 to 12 different factories and asking all of them the same questions, getting all of them to make prototypes, and looking not just at the final product, but how they communicate.
Mm. Yeah, I went through 4 different manufacturers who been great on the beginning and failed on the when we get accustomed to stuff and just
Right.
trying to do stuff. But it seems to be, touch wood, that the current one is the fourth shipment from them, and they go above and beyond
Oh, that's great.
too. So we had a situation that my geese was stuck for about 8 weeks in Dubai on customs, and the
Mm.
guys done again shipment, send it through a different route, and it was
Oh,
here
wow.
before sorted out. And they said, when you sell them, then you pay us.
Yeah.
So
See,
it's
that's a partner. That's someone
yeah,
who, they're not just looking at selling to you one time. They want to make it possible for you to buy from them over and over. And that's the difference. And anytime I get the sense now, if I'm working with not just a factory, but a person, and they're looking for one transaction, I don't do business with them.
mm,
I want to build long-term partnerships.
yeah, relationships is the key. I think it's
Yeah,
it's old saying, right? You rub my back, I rub your back, and then we
exactly.
both can be happy, right? Um, on terms of kind of development and building stuff up, what was your most successful approaches to building the podcast? So I'm going to try to steal as much information from you as possible,
Yeah,
because you went through that road, and it's always nice to have feedback from people who done it.
sure. There are two things I think to keep in mind with anything in business, and I think it's easiest to see it in podcasting. One, it's and both of these come from martial arts. Well, first one is discipline. We started as a once a week show, and very quickly, let's see, episode 37, 38 is when we went to twice a week. We have been twice a week for 9 years. We missed one episode, and it was because Skype recorded 4 episodes of silence. That's when we stopped using Skype. So, what is the secret on that side of it? Just keep going, right? How do you become a better martial artist? You keep training, you keep showing up to class, you keep having an open mind. So I knew I was not good when I started, and I believed that if I kept doing it, eventually it would get better, and it did get better. And as we had certain people on, they had a great experience, like yourself here. So maybe somebody who is more familiar with your show will say, hey, that Jeremy guy sounds like he's not a dick. Maybe I'll go listen to martial arts
Mm,
radio. Cool. And so we've grown in that way. But then also, one of the things that was important to me, we always resisted, and we continue to resist, link bait. We don't name episodes in a way that brings in the wrong kind of attention.
mm,
We don't put out social media posts that are inflammatory. We might gently poke the bear a little bit once in a while, but if you look at our social media versus a lot of martial arts social media, our numbers are not the biggest, not even close. But I would say we have the largest loyal following.
mm.
If we ask our audience for something, they'll come through for us. We don't ask them all the time. And because of that, I see our numbers, and they're good, and they slowly continue to grow. But if you look at where, again, social media comes to play here, what happens on social media? People have gone to very short form content.
Mm.
Our interview episodes average an hour. Our Thursday episodes average almost 30 minutes. That's long when, you know, most people in the world are watching content on TikTok and YouTube Shorts. And we cut up the episodes a bit, but we're also not talking about fighting. We're not saying this is right and this is wrong, because we don't do that at Whistlekick. And not everyone resonates with that. There are plenty of people out there who watch or listen to things to hate watch it. They watch it because they want to look for what's wrong. They want to find a reason to complain. We don't give them a lot of reasons to complain, so they don't watch. And that's fine, because I don't care about those views.
Yeah, I think there's a saying that your most your worst hater is your best fan, because they watch everything just to find
Yeah,
the holes in it.
yeah. But and and that's not to say that I'm opposed to criticism. I appreciate criticism when people genuinely say, hey,
Mm,
here's how you can make this better, whether it's podcasting or forums or anything. I mean, I want that feedback. But if someone's going to watch only to hate what we do, I don't care about that download. I don't care about that view. It doesn't mean anything to me, because they're never going to come to one of our events.
hmm
They're never going to buy one of our products. They're not going to support other people in the martial arts community. And that's what it's all about, right? The podcast. Why did we start the podcast? Because we were trying to grow our reach and connect people. We say this all the time on martial arts radio. Our job is to connect, educate, and entertain the martial artists of the world. And so that hate watcher, they don't want to connect.
mm, yeah.
I don't need them.
Well, yeah, that's a good mindset to have, and I'm kind of similar. Although I appreciate trolls, they doing a great job with book sales for me. I can see it on the stats
Nice.
immediately. If I've got a lot of trolls on TikTok, my book sales going through the
Oh, that's
roof.
great.
So I just talk with them as much as nicely and politely. That's one of my rules. I don't get
Yeah.
emotional. I try to be nice and polite, and usually they give up. But it's okay. What was your most memorable and most interesting interview? You've done 1,000 episodes. Which one stands out?
Can I say more than one? Because
Yeah,
there
yeah,
are
yeah.
three. When I think about, there are three. So the first one was when I got to talk to Bill Wallace, because it was so early in the show that I had no idea what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I got really lucky, and Bill Wallace came on the show. It was episode, I think, 14. And I wish I could do that interview over again. He's been on the show a couple other times, but um, and I get to train with him. I talk about my life
Wow.
being weird. Yeah, yeah, I get to train with Bill Wallace now. I have rank with Bill Wallace. Just pinch me. The second one was Fumio Demura, because
Mm,
people told me it would never happen, and some very weird circumstances happen. And again, this is the discipline part, right? We did an episode profiling him, and the right people saw it and connected me with him. And within a couple of weeks, I was interviewing him, and it was so genuine and so authentic. And he wasn't feeling well at the time. He was sick, and the episode ended, and I just remember crying, because that man had more influence on martial arts than, and at the time, than any other person alive.
mm,
If you look at if you know who he is, if you know what Fumio Demura did, his reach is beyond what most people will ever realize what he did. And it was so powerful for me to get to talk to him, especially when people told me it would never happen. And then the third one was Dan Millman, the author of the Peaceful Warrior books,
hmm
because especially that first book changed my life. Again, without that book, without Dan Millman, Whistlekick would not exist. We would not be talking right now. And a friend, fan of the show, reached out to him and said, "You should go on this show." And a year after she sent that email, He wrote back.
Hmm.
And within a few weeks, I was talking to him, and next thing you know, I'm in New York and we're hanging out, and it was just it. Here are these people that changed my life, and I went from admiring them from afar to getting to talk to them and thanking them in person. It was just so incredible because I kept showing up. Right. And I can pick up, there are other episodes that stick out to me with people that no one would remember or no one would recognize because they're not well-known names, but they're just wonderful people who have made an impact, whether, because they have grown a school and made so many lives better, or they've done something for me personally, or they became a friend. Most of my friends came on the show at one point,
Mm.
right? I get to know them from that, and it's such an interesting experience. I'm sure you're having the same thing, right? I mean, you and I are connected because of this,
Mm.
and we're I hope I can call you a friend. I feel like we're friends because of this, because of these conversations. And if I didn't have martial arts radio, you and I would have never talked.
Mm. Sure. Yeah, I try to get as many people, not unknown people or not so well known, because I think they've got very interesting stories to say, and everybody goes for the super famous people, and you hear every episode or every show, it's very similar.
Mhm.
So I kind of go out of the ways to speak to people who are maybe not so recognizable within the martial arts community, but they've got interesting stories to say, to tell. That's the
Yeah.
correct way. So,
Yeah. I think it's important to mix it up. Andrew and I talk, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with what we do, Andrew is co-host and friend and producer on the show, and he started as a listener and then became a guest and came on the show and everything. And he's one of my best friends now. But we talk about this at times. How do we keep a balance? We want to have big names on the show because that helps us bring in
yeah.
new audience members. But we also want to have what we would call everyday folks because they're
Mm.
more relatable. If we have uh, a stunt performer on or an actor on, that can be great. But like you said, a lot of those episodes end up being the same because those people get interviewed all the time
Mm.
and they get a lot of the same questions. So when we have them on, and my job is to ask them questions they don't get asked. But when we have other folks on that I can relate to, we can talk as just people. We're people who just happen to do martial arts, and we talk about the challenges of life or this obstacle or whatever it is. And the audience, people write to me and they say, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one facing that problem. Thank you for putting someone on the show who also has that in their life because I feel seen. And I think
Mm.
that's such a powerful thing that you and I and the others that are doing martial arts podcasts, and there are quite a few of us now. And I think that's awesome. We get to do, we get to help the martial arts world feel seen through our efforts.
Yeah, and I think, more podcasts, the better.
Mhm.
We all got a unique feel, unique take, and it's just good support group because each other bouncing off each other with ideas and
Yeah.
guests and so on. It just brings us all being better in what we do and having more people following and listening to us and so on. I was
Yeah.
going to ask you, how do you deal, and it was difficult on the beginning to have people to refuse being on a show. Did you have any cases like that? Or
Yeah.
people just ignoring you?
Yeah. So what's been really funny, and again, I go back to the fact that, we were fortunate to have Superfoot on early. And so when I reached out to people, that helped. I could say, here are some people who've been on the show, and most people would recognize him. But what we found is the The very well-known people, the celebrities, the actors, they generally say yes. We've interviewed enough of them now that they kind of feel left out if they say no. Uh, Everyday people will usually say yes, and quite often they'll say yes, but why me? Why do you want to talk to me?
Mm.
Uh, but what I find, the people who say no are the people who are sort of in the middle, the people who have some fame, but they want to have a lot of fame. And there are a handful of people, names you would recognize. I'm not gonna name them publicly.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
not gonna
no
disparage them.
need
There's
for
no
that.
need to do that. But when I think about them, they're people who think they're more important in the world than they are.
Mm.
We've had people that say, "Well, how much?" I'm not paying you an appearance fee to be on a podcast. Get out of here.
Mm.
And it's not that. I mean, there are two people who have ghosted an appearance on the show multiple times, and they will never get an invite again. But even most of the people who said no or ignored, yeah, they could still come on the show. I'm just not going to chase them.
Mm. Was it difficult? I don't know. For me, maybe on the beginning, maybe because of my anxiety and stuff, when I had people who either ignore me or maybe said yes and then suddenly disappeared and not replying to my messages, I took it very personally. It
Yeah.
was like, I'm reaching out to you and you just kick me in the nuts.
And I had the same experience. Absolutely. Um, to the point where if somebody booked and then no showed, and I had another episode recording later that day, that episode didn't go as well because I was still upset.
Mm.
I was hurt and stressed from the person before, 2 hours before, not showing up. That's gotten better because what I've learned is while what I do is very personal to me, it's not personal
Them.
for the other person. And that can be really hard. And I don't want to take anything away from you there, but 10 years ago when we started doing this, almost 10 years ago, I had the same reactions. I was terrified just to invite someone to be on the show. I was
Mm.
terrified to invite someone that I knew to come on the show. That was where my anxiety was. And it's gotten better in part because of the show. Because you get, it's like salespeople. Eventually enough people tell you no that it doesn't bother you anymore. And I'm not at the point where it doesn't bother me. It just doesn't bother me as much. So if we reach out and somebody says, no, thank you, okay, that's fine. Your loss. And that's truly how I see it. I know that most of the people who have come on our show have had a good experience. And quite a few of them, including celebrities, have told me this is the best interview I've ever had. Awesome. That's what I work hard to make sure there's a positive experience for the guests. That's important to me. That's far more important to me than who I'm interviewing. I want them to have a great experience. I don't really care who you are, to be honest. So
Mm.
if you're willing to show up and you're willing to work hard in your role, right? Because an interview is not easy. People think an interview is easy. No, you've got to have good things to say, and you've got to be honest and authentic, uh, and you have to listen, right? There's a lot of focus that comes from this, and it's not always easy over Zoom.
Mm.
So if somebody's going to give up their time and they're going to show up, I don't just mean literally, but show up with all they are, I've got to do the same. And that's a lot of work. And so I value that much more than, what the name is on the other side.
Mm. Bit difficult question, so we can not answer it if you don't want to. But did you ever had a case that somebody wanted to be on a show, let's say a bigger name or somebody who aspires to be a bigger name, and you just think that it's not a fit for your show? How did you deal with saying no? And did you deal it? Did you avoid it? Did you not have ever have a situation like that?
It's happened dozens of times. Not all of them have been big names, but there are two times when we say no, or two times we've said no. The first is if they don't have a relationship to traditional martial arts. So we've
Mm.
been approached by a ton of MMA fighters. We've been approached by a number of UFC champions
Oh, wow.
that have said, I want to come on your show. And we look at their background, and they've pretty much trained at an MMA gym exclusively for their time. And they don't have rank. Not that you have to be of certain rank to be on the show, but they don't have rank. Um, if I said, so what styles have you trained? They wouldn't have an answer. And philosophically, we're just not going to go there. I believe all martial arts are good, and I have plenty of friends who train MMA, and I think it's a whole other subject we could get into. I think there's a lot of value in MMA, but there are also a ton of MMA shows. We're
Mm.
not an MMA show. We're a TMA show. We're a traditional martial arts show. And if we bring on people who are only MMA, because we've brought on plenty of people who are MMA fighters, plenty of people who've done well fighting in MMA, even UFC fighters, but they have a karate background or a BJJ background, or they've spent 20 years training Muay Thai or something. Great, we can talk. The other category of people we see no to are people who it is very clear the beginning and end of the reason they want to come on the show is to pitch their book, pitch their event, etc.
Mm.
And I've learned, because we've had a few, and they steer every question back to their book or every question back to their event. And it's not that I mind people pitching their stuff, but the audience has to build a relationship with you first. And so I make sure they have time. I make sure we go into that subject. If you've got a thing that you've made that's cool, yeah, let's talk about that. That's interesting to me. But we've got to get the audience to know who you are as a martial artist first, or they're not going to care about what you offer.
Mm.
It's not a commercial. And so, when we get approached, which, at the beginning, we didn't get approached at all. Now we get approached often. And so Andrew and I will talk about it. Sometimes I'll forward it over to him and say, because he does the booking, and I'll say, this could be okay, but I'm worried about this. Or um, if it's just a flat no, I'll usually just delete it,
Mm.
especially if it's a template. If I can tell that, they reached out to, you know, 20, 30 podcasts and we were just on the list, I usually delete that. So
Mm.
to those of you out there, if you want to be on our show, and I'm going to guess on your show too, Les, you have to listen. You have to show that you care.
Mm.
Sometimes we'll book guests who don't listen to the show because one of their students is a longtime listener. And I'll say, look, you got to get them to listen to a couple episodes before we record, because I do things a little bit differently. My interview style is a little bit differently, and it's going to go better if they invest that time. And if they're not willing to invest that time, we'll often say, well, if you find the time later, let us know and we'll reschedule.
Mm. Yeah, I'm just hitting. I suppose is the success I'm putting quotes here, air quotes, that people start recognizing the show and start to reaching out instead of
Yeah,
me chasing them. They actually start reaching out and
it's a
oh,
nice feeling.
can we talk? Yeah, it's a nice feeling, but sometimes it's like you look on their post and stuff and thinking, really not my cup of tea. I really don't agree with what you're saying, how you're treating people. So it's, you're trying to be polite, but yet firm and keep to your values.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I'm the person who doesn't like to create enemies, but it seems to be unavoidable. Can't say it. I can't escape it.
Yeah.
That people gonna get upset, take things the wrong way, and do you have like a hate fan base?
I don't tend to engage with trolls.
Hmm.
And, that's one of the interesting things about just our philosophy at Whistlekick. We're not a karate company. We're not a taekwondo company. We're a martial arts company, and we are, I call it style agnostic. Styles exist. We just don't really care as a company. Now, that's different for me personally, right? Like I have personal views, and there are things that I enjoy training more than others. Even if I'm open, right? But because of that philosophy, most of the things that people would argue about, they don't argue. Now, the one place we do get argument, because we've had a variety of people connected with Bruce Lee. So Shannon Lee has been on the show. Matthew Polly, who wrote probably the most comprehensive book on Bruce Lee, has been on the show. And when we put stuff out from those episodes, we get hate because the Bruce Lee fans are pretty can get fiery at times. And we recently did an episode talking about Joe Louis, and the Joe Louis episode in there, we talked about Bruce Lee a bit. And so that brought some people out. And there was some, it's not hate directed at us because we're not saying this, right? We're giving a platform to people talking about this. I was interviewing, again, that was another episode with Bill Wallace and my friend Danny Dring, who trained under Bill as well as Joe. And well, no, that's not what happened. This is what happened because it says it on page 37 of this book. And it's like, okay, I don't care, right? Like we don't vet people. We've had people, we've had Frank Dukes has been on the show.
Oh,
I've had plenty of people. Yeah, I have, when that episode aired, I had people calling me. I had people that had tracked down my phone number, past guests of the show, names that listeners would probably recognize. I can't believe you talked to Frank Dukes. Why not? Why wouldn't I talk to Frank Dukes? It was a great episode. Am I saying what he said is true? No, but I don't say that about anybody. It's an interview. I'm not a news reporter. And so because I'm not taking a position on what any guest has ever said, it kind of frees me. It was a wonderful episode.
How do you deal? So I'm kind of in two minds about this.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a little bit scared because my thought process are not very clear, and sometimes I got muddled up with myself. And do you getting people who you in genuine disagree? You respect them, there's no problem with them, but they are completely on opposite scale of the whatever idea there is. So
Sure.
you kind of not agreeing, and um, how do you kind of navigate that? We disagree on principle, but we still can have a respectful
Right.
conversation.
I think what happens for me is I don't need anybody else to agree with me. I don't care if they're right. Just because they're on, quote, my show doesn't mean I have to change their mind. And because the goal is to tell a story, it's to have an interview, it's to have a conversation. If I look for the places where we disagree and I get upset about that, I'm going to find a reason. I mean, I'm sure if you and I spend enough time together, we would probably find something that's important to each of us that we disagree on. But why do I want to build a relationship on that? Whether it's a friendship or it's an interview, there's still a relationship there. So what I do is I look for enough common ground that we can have a conversation. But I also look for the places where not necessarily we disagree, but there's some different experiences or different understandings, because that's where the conversation happens. And I don't care if they change my mind. I've had plenty of people change my mind on the show. And here's a great example. The verb that people use to talk about martial arts. Well, I train martial arts. I practice martial arts. Plenty of people get really just as they might get upset about using a certain Japanese term for a technique,
Mhm.
or how, the third move in the Shitoru version of this cut is this, and if your hand is not here, you're wrong, right? Like, people get really upset about that, and they get upset about the verb. And I had somebody on the show, and I wish I could remember who it was, but I remember how I felt. They used the word play,
Mm.
and we talked about it. I play martial arts, and I had a visceral response. Because I felt disrespected. But the person I was talking to was also a martial artist. And obviously, they're not going to disrespect
Mm.
themselves. And we had a good conversation about it. And he said, look, the people who play professional basketball, what verb do you use? You play basketball. There are
Mm.
people making tens of millions of dollars a year playing basketball as their job. It's not inherently disrespectful. Why can't we use that word there? And so that is actually now the word that I prefer. I don't always use it because sometimes it invites a conversation that I don't feel like getting into. But I play martial arts. I play karate.
It should be natural to use play because we learn through play the best.
Exactly.
So if we can play martial arts, it gives us a better chance to learn it properly.
Yeah. And it's not so serious,
Mm.
right? What do we generally practice as a profession? Well, we practice medicine.
Mm.
I never want what I do to be so serious as what a doctor does. I'm not going there, right? Like,
And you don't want to go to the doctor and say, now we're going to play medicine.
right,
Let's see what happens.
right. That's no playing doctor suggests a whole other
But,
encounter.
yeah, so it's very interesting to have somebody who is got so much more experience in all the stuff that I'm dipping toes. Thank you very much for
Of course,
your
thanks.
advice,
Yeah,
guidance, and stuff. And it is very different episode, but I thoroughly enjoyed it.
me
Thank
too.
you for your time. And if you could
Thank you.
um, shout out all your social media links and where
Yeah,
people can do the martial arts radio to listen to the episodes and catch up on the thousands of one recorded.
yeah. So the best thing to do is search Whistlekick pretty much anywhere. So, if you're on YouTube, if you search Whistlekick, you're going to find Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio. We do episodes Mondays and Thursdays. Every episode is in video. We the old ones were audio only. Whistlekick.com is our online home, and that'll connect you to all the other things that we do, from our events to our online content site, Martial Journal, to the physical products we make, the training products, our book division. We do a lot of different things. But if you think of a thing that you might want, to search Whistlekick, and you're going to find it. Our social media is at Whistlekick: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, X, Pinterest. I mean, it's Whistlekick all over the place. If something new starts, I pretty much grab Whistlekick, whatever it is.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I
Thank you,
highly
Les.
recommend to listen to Whistle Kicks. I enjoy it, and you should too.
Thanks for having me on.
Well done for listening to all of it. You are a superhero. Thank you very much for your support. And if you could leave us that review on a podcast platform, that would be amazing. I appreciate your time, appreciate your support, and I wish you all the best until the next one.
Sports Social Podcast Network.